one tram line. Luckily we are, due to the city and Minister Berejiklian's leadership, we are going to have more. But we've got a long way to catch up with what we threw away before. And in fact, when you look, and this is work we did with the city on Sydney 2030, when you look at the fixed transport infrastructure in our city, it's actually deplorable by any international benchmark. We have only 32 kilometres of fixed track within the 26 square kilometres of the city of Sydney. If you put that same city of Sydney footprint over other cities, you see they've got 5-10 times as much fixed infrastructure. So we've got an over-concentration on the city circle. We need more coverage. Let's look at how Sydney's grown. Here's Sydney back in 1940. Couple of million people. It grew with sprawl after the war. The train system in Sydney, again, a fantastic public investment, starting with the Parramatta line back in the 1850s. We had built, up to the 1940s, 144 stations and 354 kilometres of track. In the next 70 years, we added only 13 stations and 38 kilometres of track, yet our population doubled. This is a complete failure of post-war planning with its dependence on cars. And most of those projects are actually truncated pieces. The Eastern Suburbs line to Spur, the line to Epping, of course, should have gone to Parramatta and the like. And thankfully there are some proposals, some of them started by the Labor government, many of them pushed forward by our current minister, which do deserve, including the tram lines, praise. But this is where I get perhaps controversial, and I actually advocate for the broader public interest, and sometimes it might be against more localised community interest. But really I think we should be intensifying the bits of Sydney that are absolutely fantastic. We shouldn't be saying that the coast and the harbour is full, that it's finished. We should actually be, first of all, leading with public transport, and this is where the global city is, this is where the jobs are, this is where the environment is, all the existing services. This is actually the area that should be doing the heavy lifting in terms of density, not the other way around. And if you think that that's actually too ambitious a project, I'll just remind you in terms of infrastructure, we have built 200 kilometres of motorways in the last few decades, so we actually can do infrastructure when we put our minds to it. But we shouldn't do the wrong infrastructure. And Westconnex is absolutely the wrong infrastructure in the 21st century. As we heard last night, it was a 1960s idea. Because this is the reality, and this is just a bus, not even a train. This is to move the same number of people, how much space you need. Cars not only pollute, they just take up so much room. They're incredibly inefficient. If the Mayor of Bogota can get it right, why can't our Prime Minister? But it's also a question of quality. And so when we build transport infrastructure, they're almost designed by some transport engineers who have never caught a bus or a train or walked between the two. Why do we make such miserable experiences of these places? And in fact, the problem of the city is a problem we can solve. The scars of infrastructure are actually much more a limitation on our city centre than the wonderful geography of our harbour, if we have the vision to change it. And it's about planning rather than being reactive, and about development. It should be about making the city better for all of us. And so it needs to be predictive, it needs to have vision. It needs to not only have vision, it needs to actually define itself in terms of programs and projects. So this is looking at the city centre. Bradfield understood this very well with the bridge. He also understood funding. Of course, the bridge is paid for by debt, and it's paid off over decades by the toll. The only tollway, the tollway was then a new form of funding infrastructure. Wouldn't it be good if our Treasury boffins actually thought of new ways of doing it, rather than relying on what private developers suggested? I'll quickly just run through some broader ideas. Greening Sydney, absolutely essential. Here's Surrey Hills from Cleveland Street at the bottom in 1949. Here it is today. We actually are greening our city. We have done that. But yesterday in Western Sydney, in Guildford, where it's much, much hotter across Western Sydney, why isn't there a positive landscape project, suburb by suburb, street by street? And it's not just a question of the poles and wires being sold. Well, first of all, we should be undergrounding them and actually giving the landscape the priority. We also need to think about parks, and here again there is a question of balance. This is of course within Governor Macquarie's 1,000 acres, Centennial Park's created, but in fact the edge of that park, and the park is funded through targeted land sales around the perimeter, which made the perimeter streets and allowed the park to be defined. And it's easy to overlook that today. And that decision was made 20 years after the park had been gazetted in 1905. The same possibilities arise in Western Sydney. Again, fantastic. There's some funding for Western Sydney Parkland announced the other day. These sorts of places can evolve across centuries. We need to think that's the time frame of cities. It's not 4-year election cycles. Density. Forget zoning. It's failed. It's another dinosaur of the 20th century. What we need is diverse places to live, work and play. And we need all sorts of different ones that celebrate their place, their locality, their wonderful assets, such as in Coogee. We need to stop sprawl. Really, is there a reason to subdivide another farm on our perimeter, to threaten another ecosystem? Surely we've got enough land, and if I didn't put in any of the slides of us compared to other world cities, but we have a huge footprint for a low population. We don't need to be densifying the fringe, the perimeter. This is announced the other day. High density centres are decent. Why is density locked out of those areas? I think that we've got completely this wrong at a metropolitan scale. And I know that will be a challenge to lots of people in the room. Again, the other day flying over, this is the M5, Camden Valley Way, the new railway line. Why are we putting